Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is carve. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear carve used is to mean to cut a hard material in order to produce some object, a design, or an inscription. Many times, as you hear this particular use, the material many people are talking about is wood. And I should note, an inscription might be like letters or numbers that have some sort of meaning. But again, we're cutting the wood to take that particular shape. A second way you might hear the verb carve used is to mean to cut cooked meat into slices for eating. This particular definition is going to be used a great deal here in the lead up to Thanksgiving in the United States. You might hear various people talking about carving a Thanksgiving turkey. So, taking the kind of full bird, they might say, and cutting it into slices. A third way you might hear the verb carve used is to mean to establish a particular career, role, or reputation for oneself through hard work. Sometimes, as people talk about their professional work experience, they might use this verb to describe a particular job. Maybe they helped create for themselves within their company, or maybe as something brand new, a need they saw. You should know that carve is a regular verb. To make the progressive tense, we're going to drop the E and add ing to form carving. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are made by adding D, since this verb already ends in an E. Our base verb, carve, the, ends in a voiced V sound. So our past tense ending is going to make a D sound. Carved, carved. Okay. Now, let's take a few minutes to look at some phrasal verbs that use carve. The first one we'll discuss is carve into. This can have a couple different meanings. One goes back to that first definition we were looking at. So, cutting letters, numbers, symbols into something. An example of this might be they carved their initials into the tree. Sometimes you see teenagers or young people in love do this as maybe a way to, like, this is forever. This is our special place. So initials being the first letter of their various names could be first, middle, and last. A second way to use carve into is to mean to use a knife or some other tool to carve a block into some desired shape. And that's what you're going to see after that, into some particular shape. You can see that in our example sentence here. We'll carve this piece of wood into a spoon, right? So the desired shape here is the spoon. And I've actually done this before. It's really difficult, and I'm not very artistic, so maybe I find it more difficult to do. But it is very interesting. Spoon carving is an interesting hobby. I didn't make something all that pretty or usable, but it's good to try new things. A second phrasal verb with carve that you might hear is carve out. And again, this can have a couple different meanings. The first is to take something from a larger whole. So you're taking a particular piece. An example of this, the company has carved out a new slice of the food delivery market. So if we think about food delivery, that is uh, an industry that has really grown during the pandemic, right? There are all kinds of different companies. This sentence is describing that one has taken from this larger whole of the food delivery market, they're taking a piece. A second way you hear carve out used is to mean to establish a special role for oneself. An example of this, I've carved out a specialty in teaching English language learners how to use Excel and Google Sheets. Now, this is a true statement for myself. I have a background in accounting and law, and I did that kind of work. I worked in Excel every day, pretty consistently, before I became an English teacher. And I have realized and have had the great opportunity of teaching many English language learners how to use these particular programs. It allows me to kind of combine these very different backgrounds and areas of expertise that I have. Our last phrasal verb for today is carve up. This is generally used to refer to dividing something into either separate parts or separate areas. An example of this might be, we should carve up this project to make it more manageable. So let's take this big project and break it down into separate parts or areas. And it might help us complete all the various tasks that are needed for this particular project. Now, let's continue using our verb of the day in two different verb tenses. Today, we're going to practice the simple past tense and the simple future using be going to. Let's start with the simple past tense. You might remember we use this verb tense to describe an action that has been completed at some known point in the past. Now, that known time, there might be an indication in the sentence. We might see time signals like yesterday or last week or maybe a specific date in the past. But many times that known period is implied as part of a longer passage or maybe a conversation. To make an affirmative simple past tense sentence, we need to use our ed form of this regular verb. Now, this is true no matter what our subject is. Okay, so an example sentence might be, we carved several pumpkins this past Halloween. And this particular usage is going to tie back to our first definition of cutting into some harder material, like a pumpkin or gourd. And that's, again, another common tradition here in the United States for this particular holiday, Halloween. So we do have this time signal, past Halloween, this past Halloween, so we know the date. We have a known period in the past. Now, if you want to make a negative simple past tense sentence, you're going to use did not and then the base verb. You might hear some people use the contraction didn't. An example of this might be, the meeting agenda didn't carve out time for feedback from the public. So here, there wasn't a separate piece of time for this particular activity, for getting feedback from the public. If you want to ask a yes or no question, start with did, then you're going to have your subject, and then the base verb. I always like to point out to my students, notice we're only using that ed ending in the affirmative. We don't use it in negative sentences, and we don't use it in our yes or no questions. Here's another example. Did he carve you a gift last year? Right? So again, this might be making something out of wood or some other material. Now let's take a look at be going to in the simple future. We use be going to make predictions and talk about plans in the future. And the thing we have to pay attention to is our form of be. We're going to use a present form of be with this verb tense, so we need to pay attention to our subject. I is going to match with am. You, we, and they will match with are, and then he, she, or it will match with is. Okay, so we have am, is, or are. Then we use going to and the base verb. Let's look at another example. Artists are going to carve ice sculptures at the holiday fair in December. Again, we've got that time signal telling us that this is in the future. Now, if you want to make a negative simple future sentence using be going to, just insert not after our be verb. An example of this might be, he isn't going to carve anything into the bathroom walls. So again, this not such a nice quality or a nice behavior. You would be defacing the property, but we have also all probably been in bathrooms where it does appear someone has carved something into the wall. Finally, you can ask a yes or no question in the simple future using be going to. You're going to start with that form of be, whichever form matches the subject. Subject comes next, and then we follow the same pattern, going to, and the base verb. You can see that in the example. Are you going to carve the turkey on Thanksgiving Day? Right? So, is this your plan? Now, let's spend just a couple minutes looking at a word related to our verb, carve. And that word is the noun carver. This can be used in a couple different ways. One way to use this noun would be to refer to a person who carves, maybe wood, could be stone, ivory, some other kind of material. An example of this noun in a sentence might be, wood carvers are selling their creation at this weekend's art fair. A second way you might hear the noun carver used is to refer to a knife that has been designed for the purpose of slicing meat. An example of this might be, my parents have an electric carver that they use every Thanksgiving. So here, electric carver is referring to an electric type of knife. Our third way to use the noun carver is to refer to the person who cuts meat at a meal, or could even be as a profession. An example of this, he works as the carver at the banquet hall. And it's possible you may have attended an event where there is someone stationed and whose job is just to cut meat and serve it to guests. Sometimes that will be called a carving station. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.